Okay, Alfie, I want to take you back to the beginning of your career, working as a mechanic, and you first kind of had your big break. Tell me about that.
Well, it was a weird moment, I suppose, a very special moment, and because I was sort of deciding what I should do as a career. You know, I'd left school and got a few different jobs, and sort of became a jack of all trades and a master of none in a way. You know. And the career day at school was basically a case of the army turning up and the local fishing board, and that was about it. That was our career day, you know. So that you've only got these two choices,
wow.
So choose one of them. But the other sort of choice that you could do was to go into local industry in my hometown, and I decided to do that. I decided to go to a sports car factory and start working on the line there, polishing and doing odd jobs and working on a trade, you know, developing my trade as a body mechanic. And so I used to sing along to the radio quite a lot when I was working on the cars, passing the time and stuff. And there was one guy who was in the factory buying his car and collecting it that day, and I was working on it and singing. And he said, "You've got a really good voice." He said, "You should do something with it." And well, okay, how do you do that? You know, it's easier said than done.
Absolutely.
And he told me about an opera company that were auditioning in London for their next UK tour, and he told me to go down and try out. So I took the day off work, went down, sang for them, and got offered a job.
It's an incredible story.
It was pretty weird. Turning up to the theatre was quite something, because I'd never really been around opera singers or classical singers, anything like that. It was a classical company that were auditioning. So I walked in this theatre, and it was strange, because everybody was wearing suits and ties and beautiful cut hair and pristine and clean shaven, and I basically looked like I'd been dragged by the train, you know, down there.
From the car?
Yeah, from the car. I had jeans and an old pair of beaten up boots and a check shirt, and my hair was a mess, and I was unshaven and stuff. But the only thing I knew to do was to sing, and I got up on stage in this beautiful theatre, and then the lights went out in the auditorium, so I couldn't see anybody. So there was just me and the piano player on stage, and I just started singing, and I lost myself in a little world that I sort of try and get into now every time I sing, and it felt really good. It felt really rewarding and fulfilling, and I sort of discovered that was what I wanted to do as a career, and it was a real eye-opening moment for me, that. And especially when I got offered the job, it was even better.
And you did kind of get some formal training after that,
yeah.
But you're still regarded as the bad boy, the rebel of opera, but do you see yourself like that?
Yeah.
You do?
I like it. I try and adopt that.
You like being different?
I like being difficult. Is that right?
No, it's your point of difference, right?
Exactly. I just have opinions on things, and I suppose sometimes they get me into trouble, but I just say them and come out with them. I got myself into trouble on national radio in the UK for saying that I found opera boring. I found going to the opera and classical music pretty boring.
Dope.
You know? So, and it was on live on radio, and then all this fuss started happening, newspaper articles, people phoning me up, complaining and shouting at me, and I thought, well, you know, if you listen to the interview, I explain what I mean. I said I find going to the opera boring, and that's a fact. I love classical music, and I love listening to it, and I love performing it. I love being in a role and on stage and performing. That's what I do. I'm a performer. But going to the opera, I'd be bored stiff. I'd want to be up there doing it rather than sat in the auditorium.
So what would you change about it?
About going, or
about the performance? You're kind of vocal, and I can see your passion towards your music. But what about the industry would you change if you could?
I think sometimes it is changing gradually. I've got to give it that. It is changing, but there's so much that the classical world could do to promote opera and take it to a different audience. You know, we started that when we did La Boheme on Broadway. You know, Baz Luhrmann employed a number of international opera singers to come and perform on Broadway to a mainstream audience, and I think that was a step towards in the right direction for what the establishment should be doing, from what the classical industry should be doing. They should make it more accessible. They always say that it is accessible. You know, they always say that going to the Opera House in Covent Garden or going to the Met is so accessible these days. You know, they've got cheap. You know, we've got cheap tickets. Don't give them a cheap seat. Just give them a cheap ticket. You know,
Absolutely.
Don't shove them up in the attic.
Nosebleeding
you know,
section.
yeah. Give them a cheap ticket. Let them sit in the stalls and experience it. Don't. It's weird when I find that a little frustrating. They don't. I mean, they don't have to do it all the time, but just a few performances of a run. You know, allocate a certain amount of cheaper tickets, or make it more accessible for people that can't afford the high prices.
So you want to bring it to the masses?
Yeah, I do. I'd like to. I mean, I also think the opera houses, they have these things called young artist programs, where they take singers and they try and mould them into a stereotypical classical singer, and I don't really like that. I don't like being moulded or shaped or groomed into something that I'm not. You know, I like people to see me for who I am, and yeah, that gets me in trouble as well. You know,
it's good. You're making your own way. That's
exactly.
How it's got to be done.
You know, we had an interview with the BBC when I was working at Covent Garden as a young singer, and they said, we want you to turn up in a suit, in a tie, brushed hair, clean shaven, and looking fresh and really sharp, like an opera singer should be. So I turned up in jeans, a sweatshirt that said Duffer on it, unshaven, you know, after a hangover, you know. And
my kind of man.
and had this interview, and I just thought, I'm not, you know, it's about the music, and it's about how we sound. It's not really about
what you look like.
What we look like, in a way, you know. I mean, even, you know, it's crazy. There's a lot of criticism on singers in the opera world that are, you know, you have to be big and all that sort of stuff. But it's not the case. You just have to have a good muscle control, have the ability to sing. That's about it, yeah. And
you performed at the Queen's Jubilee, the Olympics. You got a Tony under your belt. But when was that moment when, you know, you got those goosebumps and that lump in your throat, and you just thought, I've made it?
It was after. You know, there's two moments. The first time I stepped foot on a professional stage in the D'Oyly Cart after working at the car factory, and the moment that really resonates for me have to be at the end of singing "Bring Him Home" from Les Miserables at the O2 Arena on the 25th anniversary. I knew something had happened then. You know, I didn't know what, but I knew it was going to have an effect. I knew something was going to kick off from that, and it certainly did. Yeah.
It became like an out-of-body experience for you. You were so in the moment.
Yeah, it was a weird one, because when I got offered the job, the first thing that came to mind was singing "Bring Him Home" on stage at the O2 in front of 20,000 people, and I thought, how can I do that? I have to make sure that I do it right. That has to be right. So I worked constantly on the song and the show, and got it in my body, and understood the easiest thing to understand was the character. I just connected with Jean Valjean straight away. I think it was the bit of the rebel in him that reflected in myself as well. But I just connected with him first and foremost, and then the rest of the music and the show just came slotting into place. It was a wonderful experience, I went through the whole show of the evening performance, because we did two in one day. So the evening performance was something special, and I got to that moment of "Bring Him Home," and I was in a different world. You know, I was in a different world. a minute before I had to go on and sing it, I was stood at the back of the stage when they're singing Drink With Me, and I'm on my knees and I just say a little prayer, and then I get up and I walk to the front of the stage to the intro of Bring Him Home, and I'm just in another world. I was just lost in this little bubble. And then at the end of the song, I was still so in the moment that I couldn't hear. This is absolutely true. It sounds very weird to say, but I really couldn't hear the response from the audience. I was in a little zone, and it was like somebody was turning a volume switch and the sound of the audience rising.
Oh, no.
And then I realised what was going on, and then I saw groups of people standing up on their feet and getting up, and I thought, wow, is this really happening? And it was really bizarre, really crazy. And then I looked around and 20,000 people were on the feet and
wow.
screaming and applauding, and it was, and then it sort of died down, and then it went crazy again, and I had to sort of break character to blow a kiss of appreciation and then move on, you know. But it was a very, very special moment for me, and I'll never forget that. And I'm so grateful for the people and the powers that be that gave me that role to do on that show, and to Cameron McIntosh and the composers of Les Mis. I'm very, very grateful for that chance.
A lot of performers, actors, artists talk about that moment of really losing themselves in that character like you just described. How do you kind of get there? In terms, I'm sure you're backstage trying to get there every night, but do you have a strategy before you go onto it? Right now we're in your dressing room. Yeah. What do you do before you go out and perform?
I try and keep as calm as I possibly can. I basically just try and sit still for a bit. I used to pace all the time. I still do an element of that, but I used to walk like crazy and my heartbeat was racing, but now because I think my heart's kicking in a bit, I have to sort of sit down and try and keep as calm as I possibly can, you know, and just focus on what I've got to do on stage. And I'm not scared anymore of making mistakes. I used to be so frightful of afraid of making mistakes, because in the classical world, there's no license to make mistakes. You know, there's no license to sing the wrong note or lose your words or forget a phrase or, you know, not make an entry on stage, whatever. But you know, which I've done. But you know, you're so, it has to be all by the book, and there's a lot of people analysing you and very quick to judge and criticise. And he didn't sing that the same way Pavarotti did it in 1964 or whatever, or something like that, you know. And they're always there to. There's a lot of people like that. There's also a lot of people that just sit back and enjoy what you're doing. I'm not saying everybody is like that in the classical industry, and I'm not saying that as well. Going back to your original question, one of your earlier questions about the industry making strides to make it more accessible. There's a lot of people that want to do that and are working hard to do that, you know. But I just find that I've got a lot more freedom now in the music I'm singing, and the fact that I'm making my own records and putting on my own shows, I can make a mistake if I want. I might even make a mistake tonight on purpose just to show you.
Just to show
I'm sure I won't make a mistake anyway.
Speaking of your record, Storyteller, I'm in love with that. But you cover a lot of classic songs. How intimidating is it going into the studio knowing you're singing a song that was first sung by someone like Elvis Presley? Yeah,
it is intimidating. I just have to pay homage to that performer and the writers, and just try and adopt it for myself and take it on as Alfie Boe and do it as best I can. But it is intimidating. I've just recorded a new album for the UK that's out shortly, and on the session there was a keyboard player, a Hammond organ player called Booker T from Booker T and the MGs, who's a legend. He's a legend Hammond player, and he's amazing guy. I was recording a Bob Dylan track, and he picked up his phone while I was about to record, and said, "I'm just going to call Bob."
Oh my goodness.
And I went, "No,"
and
it was like, please don't book it. Not while I'm singing this, man. Don't call Bob Dylan. You know, who's covering that track? You know, and he was like, "No."
Wow.
So yeah, it can be a little intimidating when you're working with people like that. Absolutely. And working with Booker T as well. And the band were incredible that I played with for that. But the Storyteller album, I really, to be honest, I just have to adopt each song individually and just think about the sentiment behind it and what the story is about. You know, because that's why the album's called Storyteller. I'm a storyteller telling a story, and these songs have been written by some of the greatest storytellers in the industry, you know, and it's just but it's important to make it your own and believe in your own worth and your own ability, I think, and not to get too worried about it.
What's your final message in Storyteller? What do you want people to think or feel after they finish listening?
After they finish listening. There's a number of songs in there that are very some of them are quite hard stories. You know, there's like Angels from Montgomery was written by John Prine, and that's a story about a woman she's sort of so fed up of her own life. She's tired, she's depressed, she has no purpose, no goal, except to cook her husband's meals, make sure there's a beer for him when he gets in, and clean and cook and tidy, and then see him on his way for work. And the song basically talks about that she's ready to call it a day. She's ready to call her life an end, you know. But she sees a glimmer of hope. She sits down and she sings this song to herself, you know, that I am an old woman named after my mother. And then she says, when I was a young girl, I married a cowboy. I had me a cowboy, you know, and so she's reminiscing about her past and how wonderful and youthful it was and happy. And she looks at her present life in the last verse, sees how dark it is and depressing. And I suppose really the listener has to make up their own minds on what happens, because she just sings "Make Me an Angel That Flies from Montgomery." It's in Montgomery, Alabama, and it's basically make me an angel, either send me an angel to take me away, or make me an angel, let me fly away. You know, so it's a real deep song, and I suppose the listener has to decide what happens to her.
Sounds like you want to be the storyteller, but you want to tell everyone's kind of story.
Yeah, in a way, yeah. There's another song on the album, but it's very close to my heart, which is called Wayfaring Stranger. Sorry, Rank Strangers. Rank Strangers, there's so many strangers on the album. Rank Stranger is a story about a soldier that's returned home from the Civil War, and he's basically lost all his friends in battle. War has taken his family away as well, so he's gone back to his hometown, and he doesn't know anybody anymore, and nobody knows him. He's a stranger in his own town, and it really sort of speaks about how he manages, how he adjusts to that. And again, it's down to the listener to understand whether or not he does adjust, or whether he calls it a day for himself as well, whether he moves on, whether he dies, whether he tries to make a go for it in his hometown. But he says he has so many memories there that and so many close relationships that aren't there anymore, it's maybe too heartbreaking for him to stay. So much depth in a lot of the songs on the album that you can read into if you really understand the lyrics and you really listen to the lyrics. And I try my best to make them as clear as I possibly can, so people can interpret them their own way and really get the story.
Finally, if you had to direct a biopic of your life, what would the title of that film be?
Oh my word.
And who would play you?
Who would play me? My goodness me. I don't know who would play me, but I think the title would be Go For It.
Go for it.
Yeah, that was what my mother would say to me whenever I had a decision to make, whether it be about careers or whether it be about, I don't know, passing my driving test or anything like that. She'd just say, go for it. And that's probably what I'd name it, what I'd call it.
Title. Well, it's time for you to go for it. I think
Thank
you've got to
you.
go on stage and
Thank
perform,
you.
so let's see it. Thank you.